Hey there everyone, this is Melissa Furness, working artist and professor here to bring you another art process demo. Today's demonstration is on freehand machine embroidery, also known as how to use a sewing machine, more like a conceptual artist than perhaps a seamstress. So I'm just taking a little bit of fresh air before heading inside to cuddle up next to my handy sewing machine. So how about we go get started? Now I'm back inside and I'm going to go over materials you're going to need to be doing this freehand machine embroidery. First thing we have here is my trusty sewing machine. I love this one. It's really super basic. You can get it for slightly over $100. So if you want to invest in one, having a handy, basic sewing machine is really, really helpful, even to your creative practice and also for doing other practical things. I really like this hard case because I can carry it around anywhere. Just remove the lid, and here you have your sewing machine inside with everything that you need. So lift it out. So here is a view of all of my materials that I'll be using today for this demonstration. I mentioned the sewing machine, which I've got out. I've plugged it in. I'll go over some more details regarding it shortly. The other thing will be a hoop. So I have a couple different sizes of hoops. This just really helps to stabilize the fabric while you're stitching, because it is freehand stitching and you want to control it as well as you can. And so this hoop really helps to keep things straight and stable. The other thing you need is different types of thread. You can see a huge array that I have here. This is embroidery thread. There was a project that I was working on quite a while ago that involved a lot of the blue thread, so that's what you see here. The other things are bobbins, a seam ripping tool. You have these individually, but they're also located inside your sewing machine. If you open up this compartment, there's a little tool inside which can look like a brush like this, but if you pop off the end, then you have the seam ripper, which is just helpful in case you make a mistake. Also, you need the feet. So there's different types of feet on your sewing machine. This is a darning foot. I've done this with and without the darning foot, so we'll see what works best for us. We'll get to that step in a little while, but there's a lot of different choices regarding the feet that you might decide to use on your own sewing machine. Scissors, of course. Fabric. The fabric I like to use is raw linen. I'm a painter, and so raw linen is a really great surface to utilize where I could potentially draw or paint onto this or even stretch it onto a canvas. So this is one piece that I did more recently as an example for another class that I was teaching. You can see that pattern that's already been sewn onto it. But this is the fabric that I was utilizing. This one's been washed because I was really interested in that distressed look. And then this is a piece that a student had already drawn into. Other things that you would need would be pencils. I like to draw into my pieces. Gouache, you can see the blue stain there is gouache. Regarding the fabric, when you want to make sure that you don't choose something that's too thin or too stretchy, because that's not going to be stable enough in order for you to make these designs that you want to produce. And also you need image and pattern ideas. This is one of my very favorite books called Decorative Ornament, and it goes through both cultural and historical patterns. And I've used this quite a lot over the years with my work. So you can use something like this, or you can go online, print out a pattern idea, or you can decide you want to work entirely from your head. Also, I have brushes here. The pencils, water-soluble pencils are great, which I'll show you in just a moment. So I believe that takes care of everything, and we can get started on the process. I'm going to start by drawing a pattern or an image that I like onto my raw linen. What I have here is the book that I showed you with the different patterns that I like to use. And this is super handy. Like, this is obviously not used for art, but hey, a recipe stand. And I can hold my book up nicely, see my design, and create my drawing. And what I have here are different water-soluble pencils. These are ones that I like to use quite a lot. This is a sepia, kind of a dark brown color, which I think I'll try and play around with. You can also use, just a straight pencil if you don't want that underlying color showing, but I tend to like, having that there. And also water if you want to use a brush. To give it a little bit of coloring as a base underneath. So I think maybe I'll play around with this pattern here. As an artist, I suppose I could make this absolutely perfect, but and do all the measurements. But I think what I'm going to do is just keep it a bit rougher, because the whole process of just doing freehand embroidery definitely is not perfect. So you have this, and you also sometimes want to sharpen your pencil as you go, so it's a good idea to get a pencil sharpener as well. Now I have my pencil sharpener, sharpened up my pencil, and I'm going to continue working to create this drawing. I'll give you a little bit of a closer view so you can see what I'm doing, and also I'll play around with dipping into the water and adding a little bit more in terms of color or a little bit of a wash on this piece before I even start sewing. The next step is to prepare my machine so that I am ready to sew. First thing I'm going to do is take out the existing bobbin, take off the thread, make the thread selection that I want, and then I can show you how to then get your bobbin ready with the proper color thread that you would like. So the thread I've chosen is this kind of shiny to dark blue turquoise fabric thread, which I think goes pretty well with that brown that I have underneath. So I'm going to take that thread, stick it through my spool at the top. Oops, I need to find the end first. Pull that out a bit. There we go. And then in order to get a bobbin ready, I need to just take it over the top here. So really you just want to pay attention to the little drawings that are actually on your sewing machine. So for the bobbin, this is the image. You want to just go around this little knob here. So go and turn it around this way and back down. So get your bobbin. Some of these are plastic, some of them are metal, and just wind your thread a little bit around there. You can also put it up through these holes here. I'm not too concerned about that though right now. Then you want to put it onto this little metal area, put it in through that hole, and then just slide it back. It'll snap. And then essentially all you need to do is just make sure your machine is turned on. Some of them have switches in different areas. Mine has a switch down here. And then you can just press down on the foot feed and it will load the bobbin for you. Okay, so my bobbin is full, it's ready to go. So I will cut the thread, pull the bobbin off, and then get ready to finish preparing the rest of what I need in order to get started with sewing. Alright, so here is my bobbin ready, my thread's on the top. The next step that's really important for freehand machine embroidery is that you need to lower the feed dogs. So on my particular machine, some of these are different depending on what kind of brand or style that you have. Sometimes they have a little like case that you basically just put over the feed dogs, and others have a button where you can actually just lower them. So with mine, I have to actually pull this area off, and then you turn it around to the back side here, and I can show you that there is this button here. So it shows you that the feed dogs there are up, and then you move it to the side, and now they're down, and I'm ready to start sewing. So I just replace my compartment here, and then turn my machine back around, and I'm on to preparing the next step. So this is the presser foot of my sewing machine. The next thing we need to do, now that we've let the feed dogs down, is to switch out the foot. So there's a couple of different options. One is to just remove the bottom of the foot like this. There was a little lever back here that I pressed that you can see there that just released it. You could potentially do your freehand embroidery just like that. But there's also something called a darning foot. So if I open my little drawer, I have a couple of different types of darning foots, but I think I'm going to use this one. I have one that's closed and one that's more open. And then also in this drawer, you have this strange looking sort of contraption that might at first appear a little bit odd, but it's actually very useful. It's kind of like a little mini screwdriver, flathead screwdriver, and then you turn that knob there to remove this foot entirely, and then you can put your darning foot on. So in order to put the darning foot on, you can see that it fits there, kind of in where that bolt is, you can see, and then there's a metal lever that goes up high. It goes above that there. So once you get that sitting in place nicely, then you can take your little screwdriver, tighten it up, and then we should be good to go with at least the mechanical parts of it. So next I'm going to put my bobbin, you know, into this bobbin area here. You put that in that hole, and then there's that handy illustration to help you put things together. So you take a look at the thread and how it's supposed to be woven and come up. And so there's a little, you know, area where it goes underneath. And then when you put this lid on, you just stick it in there. And then the other thing you need to do is then thread the rest of the machine from the top down. So once again, like I mentioned before, your machine wants to help you. So on the top of the machine, you're going to see numbers. See 1 and 2 with the arrows, and it's going to tell you exactly how to thread up that machine. Loop underneath here. Turn this around to get this loop to come out here. Go back down again around this other loop. You know, once you've done this a couple of times, it's pretty simple. At first, you might have to consult your manual just to make sure that you did it properly. And then you just thread the needle, and we are almost ready to start sewing. Now I want to get my pattern that I drew onto my cloth ready with my hoop. I realize my hoop is a little bit small for this cloth, but it doesn't mean that I can't, you know, put it in and then just move it around as I'm ready to work on different areas of it. So the hoop works where, you know, you've got this sort of knob that will tighten things up. You put that underneath and then put the fabric and then snap it in. So once you get it in there, you want it to be down low, so this area is down and not up. And then you can tighten it with this knob up here if you need. And your fabric is ready. And now you can go over to your sewing machine. So now I'm ready to start sewing. On the top you see a button that will allow you to control the tension. You want that to be between 1 and 2. And the width, it doesn't exactly matter, or your length. So I just put it, between 2 and 3 for those. And then I've got my straight stitch setting to start. So like I mentioned before, with your hoop, make sure the fabric is nice and tight within it. And then with this darning foot, you realize that you can lift that up to get the needle to get underneath. So then you put the foot feet down with this lever in the back of your sewing machine. You can put your thread down as well. And then begin sewing. So just a few tips for creating a straight stitch line. The length of the stitch doesn't necessarily matter. You control it with the foot. Don't be scared if you go too slowly with your pressing down of your foot down below. You'll end up getting really big stitches. So the whole kind of rule is a fast foot and a slow hand. And I have to admit, it takes some time to get used to this. So do try this out on some other kind of test fabrics. You can see here, I'm able to guide this line wherever I want it to go. And then when I want to pivot, I can just put the needle straight down, lift this up a little bit, turn it, and then keep on going. And it's okay to make mistakes. We're artists. Artists embrace mistakes. That's all I can say. So here you go, fast foot, slow hand, as you can see here. But honestly, my favorite way of doing a stitch is actually through like a zigzag. So what I want to do is give this an impression that it's been like filled out or colored in, I suppose. That's what you do with this zigzag stitching. I mean, for this, the width does matter a bit more. So I'm going to put it on a wide width because I want it to fill in. Or maybe like at the start of here, it depends on like how even you want it to be. If you move slowly, you get a statin stitch. If you move fast, you get something that looks really quite chaotic. But hey, you're an artist. If that's what you want to do, it might be kind of interesting. See what happens for you. So you can see here, it's starting to fill in for me. And it's all dependent on like how steady I move my hand. It's a bit of a slow process as well. So you should have some patience, but hey, we have time now, don't we? So I'm going to increase the width a little bit to 6 now that I've gotten down to this bottom part, so you can see what's happened with that other area. And now I'll continue, and you can see how I can get that to fill in however I want, depending on where I guide it. So pause for a moment so you can see what I've got going here so far. And I'll continue to see what I can do to fill this out, and you can get an understanding of how it might look. But like I mentioned, hey, you can take whatever creative license that you like and create any kind of design, or even just, consider this a way of creating a drawing. You don't have to use just graphite pencil to make a drawing. Create a drawing which is stitched, and it could be a quite beautiful and a really innovative way to produce your work. The other great thing about this, it really is truly freehand, is that you can go forwards and even backwards if you want. and create a totally freeform drawing. You know, maybe you went a little too fast in one area and you want to back up and do it again and fill it in a little bit more. So you can see I'm starting to fill out my pattern here. And as you go, you can keep moving the hoop. We could also potentially try it without the hoop. Shall we try that? So let's take it off completely. It really depends on the fabric that you're using and how steady you are with your hands. I mean, you might end up being like really good at this and be like, Melissa, why did I need the hoop? So I'll just take it off completely and just see if I can manage it that way. Since my pattern is, you know, like I mentioned, a little too big for the hoop anyway. But the other thing too is that you could even do this with a really large piece of fabric that maybe you want to then later stretch onto a piece of onto stretcher bars to create a painting, which I've considered before. Because you see that, you know, to me, this is a fairly stiff fabric. It is loose weave. That's important. It would be really quite hard, I think, for you to do this kind of stitching in a heavy cotton duck canvas. So do think carefully about, you know, what material you're doing this on. Or use a heavy, you know, kind of a more of a heavy duty sewing machine with a more heavy duty needle, which you can also do. So you can see here, I've gotten partway down, and then, you know, I could just keep on going, but maybe like, you know, lower the width of my stitch and then, you know, back up even and do these little knobs on the design. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. But this is working pretty well, even without, you know, the hoop. And if you want to just keep on going, you can fill out that whole design. You know, like I said, if you don't want to, you know, break the thread or cut the thread, you can switch in between the zigzag and a straight stitch. So a straight stitch might help you to get somewhere else in the design without going too far out of your way, without having to break that thread. So I can just do the straight stitch to go back down here and go back out to, you know, my next part of my design, how it's kind of arcing out. And like I said, as an artist, I embrace mistakes and things that are a little bit imperfect in this process, which I enjoy and I use in my work. So I'd encourage you to do that as well. I admit that it took me a little while to get used to the slow hands, fast foot thing. It's just like, I don't know, a new way of coordinating yourself, but you can figure it out. hey, look at that. You know, I'm pretty, happy with how that came out. So, you could spend, certainly quite a bit more time. You could switch out colors, you can add layers and texturing. Hey, it's a great thing to do while maybe you're binge watching or something like that. What I like to do at this point is to maybe add some embellishments with gouache. And so I'm going to get out my gouache here. Okay, so what I have here is my fabric and some gouache set out. Gouache is basically an opaque sort of watercolor, which I really love to use. So you can see it sets on top a little bit, but then it eventually soaks in. So you can create some nice washes of color over the top of the stitching that you've done. And like I mentioned before, you can also do this beforehand, like underneath the stitching, and see how it progresses from there. It's all a process of experimentation and see what works best for you. I like to keep it loose and organic, just playing around with how the materials interact with each other. I could use a little bit more of a different color, I suppose. I tend to work in ranges of a color, and you can mix up any color you want, as you know. Gouache is also really great, like I've got it here on my palette, but the other thing about it is that when it dries, it's not something you have to throw away. You can re-wet it and use it still, and use it again, maybe in another piece or in the next image or in your sketchbook or something like that. The other thing I kind of like, you could cut off all of the strings you see here. I kind of like keeping them around for a bit until I decide what my finished product is going to be. Usually when I'm doing different processes, certainly I have a reason for choosing that process for what I plan to do. So really what I'm showing you with these videos is many different ways to do many different types of things. So hopefully the way that you're going to deal with this is come up with an idea and realize that that idea is probably best expressed through this particular process. And if you're at home and maybe you're not in your regular kind of studio situation like I am, then something like this can really expand your process and give you some potential of other things that you could produce when you might be in a little bit more of a compromised studio situation, and you can create something really beautiful and wonderful and surprising out of that. So you can see I'm just messing around with how I can extend and transform and play with that pattern. I could, I suppose, even dye it or dip it into a larger kind of pool of color, which would also be really amazing. And like I said, this could end up getting stretched onto a stretcher bar and turned into a real actual painting. It could end up becoming a quilt, Grandma's sort of more alternative quilt making process, which could be really exciting as well and really interesting. Here you see it close up and some of the things that I've done with the gouache and also how it interacts with the stitching. It can be quite beautiful if you have the time and put a little bit of effort into it and also enjoy the experience. Here's a close-in view on another piece that I had done on a previous workshop as well. So you can see how the gouache can be used in more of an abstract way or as a background color. Thank you all for joining me on today's demonstration on how to do freehand machine embroidery. Don't forget to like, follow, and come back again next time for my next demonstration. Thanks again.